The First Punic War was far more than a clash between two powers. It was a struggle for dominance over the Mediterranean. Rome, an emerging land power, and Carthage, a formidable maritime empire, both sought control of Sicily. This ambition sparked a brutal 23-year conflict that reshaped the ancient world. By the early 3rd century BC, Rome had solidified its control over the Italian peninsula, having defeated neighboring tribes, the Etruscans, and Greek colonies. With approximately 400,000 citizens and a total population of 3 million, Rome's strength was undeniable. The Republic's military might stemmed from its disciplined legions and a highly organized alliance network that could quickly mobilize large numbers of troops. Despite this land-based dominance, Rome lacked a significant navy and had no experience projecting power overseas. In contrast, Carthage had much older roots, founded around 814 BC by Phoenician settlers. It had evolved into a prosperous city-state with 200,000 residents and a vast commercial empire. At its height, Carthage ruled over 3 million people across North Africa, southern Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and parts of Sicily. Carthage's wealth was built on trade, with its navy securing control over vital Mediterranean sea routes. This naval dominance made it the richest city in the region. Although relations between Rome and Carthage had been peaceful, growing competition between Rome's expansionist ambitions and Carthage's maritime power made war inevitable. The Messana crisis was the spark that ignited the First Punic War in 264 BC, escalating an isolated conflict into a full-scale confrontation between Rome and Carthage. It began when the Mamertines, mercenaries who had seized control of Messana, were besieged by Hiero II of Syracuse. Fearing defeat, they appealed to both Carthage and Rome for assistance. Carthage, eager to expand its influence in Sicily, sent a garrison of 12,000 soldiers under Hanno's command to occupy Messana. However, the Mamertines, concerned about losing their autonomy, switched allegiance and sought Rome's support. Rome, seeing an opportunity to check Carthage's growing power in Sicily, dispatched consul Appius Claudius Caudex with 9,000 infantry and 500 cavalry across the Strait of Messina. Despite Carthage's naval superiority, the Romans successfully crossed and quickly defeated the Syracusan forces besieging the city. Rome then engaged Carthage's troops in a pitched battle, using disciplined infantry and skirmishing tactics to drive Carthaginian forces into retreat. The conflict resulted in 6,000 Carthaginian casualties compared to 1,340 Roman losses. The Siege of Agrigentum in 262 BC marked Rome's first major land victory of the war, involving a prolonged and intense confrontation between the Roman Republic and Carthaginian forces in Sicily. The Romans, led by consuls Lucius Postumius Megellus and Quintus Mamilius Vetulus, brought a vast force of around 40,000 men to besiege the city. The Carthaginian commander, Hannibal Gisco, held a much smaller garrison but had fortified the city and gathered nearly 50,000 civilians from the surrounding areas for protection. The Romans began the siege by cutting off the city's supplies through a network of trenches and small forts, a tactic known as circumvallation. Hannibal initially tried to disrupt Roman foraging operations, but was repelled. After months of stalemate, Carthage sent a relief force under General Hanno, consisting of 50,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 60 war elephants. The Romans, however, managed to lure Hanno's forces into a trap, outflanking and defeating them. The relief army suffered heavy casualties, losing 3,000 infantry and 200 cavalry, forcing Hanno to retreat. In the early phase of the war, Rome faced significant difficulties at sea due to its lack of naval experience. Carthage, with a fleet of over 350 warships and highly skilled sailors, dominated the Mediterranean. Determined to compete, Rome built its first fleet of 120 quinqueremes in 260 BC. However, early defeats, such as the loss of 17 ships and the capture of consul Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina at the Battle of the Lipari Islands, revealed Rome's vulnerabilities. To counter Carthage's superior naval skills, Rome developed the corvus, a boarding device that allowed their soldiers to board enemy ships and transform naval battles into land-style engagements. This innovation proved decisive at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC. Under the command of consul Gaius Duilius, the Roman fleet faced a Carthaginian force of 130 ships, led by Admiral Hannibal Gisco. Despite Carthage's greater experience, the Romans captured 31 Carthaginian vessels using the corvus, and sank 13 more, forcing Hannibal to retreat with the remaining fleet. This victory marked Rome's first major naval success and demonstrated the game-changing effectiveness of the corvus. Rome's newfound naval prowess culminated in 256 BC at the Battle of Cape Ecnomus, one of the largest naval battles in ancient history. Both Rome and Carthage committed vast numbers of ships and personnel to this clash. The Romans, led by consuls Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Manlius Vulso Longus, deployed 330 warships carrying around 140,000 marines and rowers. Carthage, commanded by Hamilcar and Hanno the Great, fielded 350 warships manned by nearly 150,000 crew, making it a massive confrontation involving nearly 290,000 men. Rome aimed to break through Carthage's naval defenses and launch an invasion of North Africa. Carthage countered by attempting to maintain control of the sea. The Roman fleet formed a triangular formation, with their horse transports protected in the center. The battle split into 3 separate engagements, with Carthage attempting to outmaneuver the Romans, but ultimately failing. Using the corvus boarding device, Roman marines boarded Carthaginian ships, transforming the engagements into fierce hand-to-hand combat. After suffering heavy losses, the Romans sank 30 Carthaginian ships, captured 64, and lost 24 of their own vessels, securing a decisive victory. This victory secured Roman control of the seas, paving the way for their first invasion of North Africa, a strategic move that would alter the course of the First Punic War. Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus landed with 15,000 infantry and 500 cavalry near Aspis, quickly capturing the town and using it as a base to raid the Carthaginian countryside. Within months, he had taken over 20,000 prisoners and secured key victories at Addis and Tunis, pushing Carthage to the brink of collapse. In desperation, Carthage hired a Spartan mercenary commander, Xanthippus, to reorganize their defenses. In the spring of 255 BC, Xanthippus led a Carthaginian army consisting of 12,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 100 war elephants to confront Regulus near the Bagradas River. The open terrain favored the Carthaginian cavalry and elephants, which overwhelmed the outnumbered Roman horsemen and threw the Roman infantry into chaos. Regulus's legions were encircled and crushed. Only 2,000 Romans managed to escape, while 12,000 were killed, and Regulus himself was captured along with 500 others. This disastrous defeat ended Rome's campaign in Africa and forced them to abandon plans of swiftly ending the war by threatening Carthage's homeland. The defeat also demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of war elephants, which would shape Carthaginian strategy for the remainder of the conflict. The Siege of Lilybaeum, which lasted from 250 to 241 BC, was a grueling 9-year standoff between Roman and Carthaginian forces in western Sicily. The Romans, fielding a massive force of over 100,000 soldiers and supported by a naval contingent of around 200 ships, encircled the city to cut off Carthage's primary base of operations on the island. The Carthaginian garrison, led by General Himilco, defended with a much smaller force of 7,000 infantry and 700 cavalry, relying on strong fortifications and effective counter-siege tactics. The Romans made several attempts to breach the city, using siege engines and constructing elaborate earthworks, but the defenders held firm. Constant counterattacks by the Carthaginians undermined Roman positions, prolonging the siege. Meanwhile, Carthage sent several relief fleets in an attempt to break Rome's naval blockade, resulting in a series of intense naval skirmishes. The prolonged siege drained resources on both sides, forcing the war to shift focus back to naval engagements. The stalemate was finally broken on March 10, 241 BC, at the Battle of the Aegates Islands, the decisive naval clash that ended the First Punic War. The Roman fleet, commanded by Gaius Lutatius Catulus, consisted of 200 warships, while the Carthaginians, led by Hanno, fielded 250 ships. The Carthaginian fleet, heavily laden with supplies and manned by poorly trained crews, gave the Romans a critical advantage despite being outnumbered. The battle took place off the western coast of Sicily. Using superior tactics, the Romans intercepted the Carthaginian fleet in rough seas, taking advantage of their more maneuverable ships and seasoned marines to secure a decisive victory. The Romans sank 50 Carthaginian ships and captured 70 more, while their own losses were minimal. The defeat crippled Carthage's ability to continue the war, forcing them to sue for peace and accept the terms of the Treaty of Lutatius, which resulted in the loss of Sicily. Carthage was required to pay 3,200 talents of silver over 10 years, draining its resources and marking the beginning of its decline. Meanwhile, Rome's power grew, setting the stage for future expansion. Humiliated and weakened, Carthage sought to rebuild, and this resentment would eventually fuel the Second Punic War, led by Hannibal's vow for revenge. In 218 BC, Hannibal Barca led 50,000 troops and 37 war elephants from Spain, crossing the Ebro River, the Rhine, and the treacherous Alps into Italy. His audacious land invasion would shake the foundations of Rome and forever change the course of history. The roots of the Second Punic War lay in the deep-seated rivalry between Rome and Carthage that followed their first conflict. After Carthage's defeat, Rome took control of Sicily and imposed harsh indemnities, severely weakening Carthage. Despite this, Carthage aimed to restore its power, largely driven by the ambitions of the Barcid family. Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant Carthaginian general, set his sights on expanding Carthage's influence in Iberia, a land rich in silver and resources. By securing Iberia, Carthage hoped to rebuild its military strength. After Hamilcar's death, his son-in-law Hasdrubal took over, followed by Hamilcar's son, Hannibal, in 221 BC. Hannibal's hatred for Rome, instilled by his father, would define his command. In 219 BC, he attacked Saguntum, a Roman ally located south of the Ebro River. This violation of the Ebro Treaty ignited tensions and led Rome to declare war. With control over Iberia's vast resources, Hannibal prepared to take the fight to Rome itself, thus setting the stage for one of the most legendary military campaigns in history. Hannibal's decision to invade Italy by crossing the Alps was one of the boldest moves in military history. Rather than attack by sea, Hannibal aimed to surprise the Romans, forging alliances with northern Italian tribes. Starting from New Carthage, a key Carthaginian city on the Iberian Peninsula, Hannibal led 40,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. After crossing the Ebro River and advancing through Gaul, his forces navigated the Rhone River before reaching the base of the Alps. In late autumn of 218 BC, likely in October or early November, Hannibal began his treacherous journey through the mountains, facing snow and freezing temperatures. Historians debate the exact route, but he likely used the Col de la Traversin or the Mont Genevois Pass. The harsh winter conditions and constant harassment by mountain tribes added to the perils, as narrow paths and avalanches took a heavy toll on his army and elephants. By the time Hannibal descended into the Po River Valley, his army was reduced to about 26,000 men, and many of his war elephants had perished. Despite these losses, the audacity of the Alpine crossing caught Rome off guard, setting the stage for one of the most legendary military campaigns in history. Upon entering Italy in late 218 BC, Hannibal achieved his first significant victory at the Battle of Ticinus. Here, his cavalry, including Numidian horsemen, outmaneuvered the Romans under Publius Cornelius Scipio, wounding Scipio and forcing the Romans to retreat across the Po River. Shortly after, in December 218 BC, Hannibal decisively defeated the Romans at the Battle of Trebia. Hannibal fielded approximately 40,000 troops, including 20,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry, with support from 10,000 Numidian and other light infantry. The Roman forces, commanded by Consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, had a larger force of around 42,000 troops, including 36,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. Hannibal used his cavalry to lure the Roman forces into a trap as they crossed the icy river. The Carthaginian forces ambushed and encircled the Romans, whose infantry, despite their numbers, suffered due to the effective Carthaginian tactics. The battle inflicted heavy losses on the Romans, with estimated casualties of around 26,000 Roman troops compared to 5,000 Carthaginian losses. This forced the Romans to withdraw, consolidating Hannibal's hold over northern Italy. The following year, Hannibal achieved another stunning victory at the Battle of Lake Trasimene in June 217 BC. Hannibal used the geography to his advantage by hiding his army in the hills surrounding the lake, where he ambushed the Roman forces under Gaius Flaminius. As the Romans marched along the lakeshore, Hannibal's troops attacked from the rear and the flanks, trapping the Roman army against the lake. The result was a devastating defeat for Rome, with nearly 25,000 Roman soldiers killed or captured. Hannibal's greatest victory came in 216 BC at the Battle of Cannae, facing a much larger Roman force, 86,000 Romans against 50,000 Carthaginians. Hannibal executed a brilliant double envelope strategy on the flat plains of Cannae. He allowed the Romans to advance into his center, then surrounded them with his cavalry and infantry. The Roman army was annihilated, with tens of thousands killed. Key Roman commanders, Lucius Aemilius Pallas and Gaius Terentius Varro, were left helpless in the face of Hannibal's tactical genius. After the catastrophic defeat of Cannae, where 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed or captured in a single day, Rome was in shock. Many of its allies began to waver, and the Republic seemed on the brink of collapse. In the aftermath, Quintus Fabius Maximus re-emerged as a central figure, advocating a strategy of attrition and avoidance, known as the Fabian Strategy. Instead of risking further catastrophic defeats, Fabius adopted a slower, more deliberate approach. He used the rugged terrain of Apulia and Campania to his advantage, avoiding direct confrontations with Hannibal's army. Fabius harassed the Carthaginian supply lines and burned crops, ensuring that Hannibal's army, already strained after years in Italy, struggled to feed itself. However, Hannibal found temporary refuge and support in the city of Capua, which defected to the Carthaginian side after Cannae. Hannibal's troops were stationed there for the winter in 215 BC, but the leisure and luxury of Capua began to weaken his soldiers' discipline and morale, diluting the sharpness of his once formidable army. While Fabius's strategy was unpopular with the Roman populace, who favored more aggressive tactics, it slowed Hannibal's progress. Ultimately, the Fabian strategy, combined with the loss of discipline among Hannibal's troops in Capua, bought Rome the time it needed to recover and eventually go on the offensive. As the war in Italy reached a stalemate, the focus shifted to Spain, where Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal Barca, attempted to send reinforcements to support his brother. Rome, realizing the catastrophic importance of Spain to Carthage's war efforts, dispatched Scipio Africanus to cut off Carthaginian reinforcements and secure the region. In 209 BC, Scipio led a daring assault on New Carthage, a crucial Carthaginian stronghold on the Mediterranean coast. The city's location was vital, as it allowed Carthage to control Spain's rich resources and maintain sea routes to North Africa. Scipio, commanding a force of 25,000 troops, faced a well-fortified Carthaginian garrison. He capitalized on a vulnerable section of the city's defenses near the lagoon, launching a surprise amphibious assault that overwhelmed the defenders. The Siege of New Carthage not only gave Rome control of the city, but also captured valuable resources and hostages, including important Carthaginian leaders. This victory significantly weakened Carthage's hold on Spain, cutting off a major source of troops and supplies for Hannibal. It also enhanced Scipio's reputation as a brilliant military commander. Scipio's success in Spain paved the way for the next phase of the war, the invasion of North Africa. By 204 BC, Scipio had forced Carthage into a defensive position on its home turf, leading to the decisive final confrontation at Zama, where Rome would finally bring Carthage to its knees. After years of campaigning in Italy, Hannibal was recalled to Carthage in 203 BC to defend the city against the advancing Roman forces led by Scipio Africanus. Hannibal returned with a reduced army, but still posed a formidable threat to Rome. The decisive battle at Zama took place in 202 BC on the open plains of Zama, located southwest of Carthage. The key commanders in this final confrontation were Scipio Africanus, who had honed his skills during campaigns in Spain and North Africa, and Hannibal, still regarded as one of history's greatest military tacticians. The battle saw 35,000 Roman troops face off against 40,000 Carthaginians, which included Hannibal's famous war elephants and his remaining cavalry. Scipio, having learned from earlier encounters with Hannibal's forces, employed a strategy that neutralized the threat of Hannibal's elephants. He instructed his troops to open lanes in their formation, allowing the elephants to pass through harmlessly, thus avoiding the chaos the elephants might have caused. Meanwhile, Scipio's Roman cavalry, led by Massinissa, outflanked and defeated Hannibal's cavalry, eventually encircling the Carthaginian infantry. Hannibal's forces, overwhelmed by Scipio's tactical brilliance, were decisively defeated. The Battle of Zama marked the end of the Second Punic War. Carthage was forced to sue for peace, losing its military power and influence, while Rome emerged as the dominant power in the Mediterranean, ending Carthage's role as a major force in the ancient world. The Treaty of Zama, signed in 201 BC, officially ended the Second Punic War. The terms were harsh for Carthage. They were forced to cede Spain to Rome, surrender their war fleet, except for 10 ships, and pay a massive indemnity of 10,000 talents over 50 years. Carthage also had to agree never to wage war without Rome's permission, reducing its power to a regional state. For Rome, the victory established its dominance in the western Mediterranean, paving the way for further expansion into Africa, Spain, and eventually the eastern Mediterranean. As for Hannibal, he continued to serve Carthage in a political role, but was eventually exiled due to Roman pressure. He fled to the Seleucid Empire and later Bithynia, where he took his own life to avoid capture by Roman agents. The Second Punic War marked the beginning of Rome's transformation into a Mediterranean superpower, solidifying its dominance for centuries. In 146 BC, Rome wasn't just aiming to win a war, it sought to erase Carthage from history. After surviving 2 brutal wars, Carthage stood defiant once more. But this time, Rome's goal was total annihilation. This is the story of Carthage's last stand, where defeat meant extinction. After the devastating losses of the Second Punic War and the imposition of the Treaty of 201 BC, Carthage was a shadow of its former self. The treaty stripped Carthage of its overseas territories, forced it to dismantle its navy, and imposed crippling war indemnities. Despite these harsh conditions, Carthage managed to recover economically through trade and agriculture, gradually rebuilding its wealth and influence. However, Carthage's recovery remained a source of concern for Rome, which continued to view the city as a potential threat. Meanwhile, King Massinissa of Numidia, a Roman ally, seized every opportunity to expand his territory at Carthage's expense. Over the years, Massinissa encroached on Carthaginian land, provoking repeated conflicts. However, under the terms of the treaty, Carthage was prohibited from waging war, even if attacked, without first gaining Rome's permission. Bound by this restriction, Carthage found itself unable to defend its own territory, further aggravating tensions and leaving the city increasingly vulnerable to Massinissa's ambitions. By 149 BC, Carthage, in desperation, launched a military campaign against Numidia, breaking the terms of the treaty. Rome quickly seized this violation as a pretext for war. The influential Roman statesman, Cato the Elder, who had long advocated for Carthage's destruction, famously declared, "Carthago delenda est," meaning, Carthage must be destroyed. His words echoed the growing sentiment in Rome. Carthage's existence itself was now seen as a threat, and Rome was determined to eliminate it once and for all. Carthage's decision to launch a military campaign against King Massinissa of Numidia in 149 BC was a clear breach of the treaty established after the Second Punic War. By taking military action without Rome's permission, Carthage gave Rome the perfect excuse to declare war. Rome, which had long harbored suspicions about Carthage's resurgence, quickly seized the opportunity to justify the third and final confrontation. In response, Rome imposed harsh demands on Carthage. To avert immediate destruction, Carthage was forced to surrender 200,000 sets of armor, 2,000 catapults, and their entire fleet of around 50 warships, a crippling blow that stripped the city of its defense capabilities. Believing that compliance might prevent further conflict, Carthage handed over these supplies to the Romans. However, after receiving the warships, Rome took a further humiliating step. The fleet was burned in Utica's harbor as a dramatic display of Roman dominance. This public destruction of Carthage's navy shattered any remaining hopes of peaceful resolution and enraged the Carthaginians. However, Rome's final ultimatum was even more shocking. They demanded that Carthage abandon their city on the coast and relocate inland, at least 10 miles from the sea. This ultimatum was designed to dismantle Carthage's trade and maritime identity, effectively erasing the city's wealth and power. At that time, Carthage had over 100,000 inhabitants, a thriving population that relied on its coastal position for trade and economic survival. For the Carthaginians, relocation was an unthinkable act that would result in the destruction of their city's cultural and economic heart. Faced with this impossible choice, Carthage chose to stand and fight rather than surrender their city. Soon after, Roman forces led by Manius Malinius landed at Utica, just north of Carthage, and began preparations for the siege that would bring the conflict to its bloody conclusion. The Roman invasion of 149 BC saw an army of 50,000 soldiers land at Utica, 35 kilometers north of Carthage. Supported by 50 warships, the Romans expected a swift victory, but they quickly encountered serious difficulties as they underestimated the strength of Carthage's defenses. The city's fortifications, including its towering walls, and the fierce determination of the Carthaginians, created a formidable challenge. During this period, Hasdrubal the Bow-Arch rose as Carthage's key military leader. Tasked with organizing the city's defense, Hasdrubal marshaled a force that included newly freed slaves and citizens, bringing the total defenders to 30,000 men. He also maintained a separate field army stationed at Nepherus, south of the city, to harass Roman supply lines. Carthage's defense was innovative and fierce. Carthaginian forces used fire ships to damage Roman vessels during naval skirmishes, slowing the Roman siege. On land, Carthaginian troops launched effective guerrilla tactics, ambushing Roman forces and delaying their advance. A notable success for the Carthaginians came at the Battle of Lake Tunis, where they managed to inflict significant losses on the Roman forces. Despite these early setbacks, Roman forces regrouped under the emerging leadership of Scipio Aemilianus, who, although not yet in full command, began organizing and disciplining Roman forces. His strategic insight was crucial in tightening the Roman siege and preparing for the decisive phase of the conflict. The Romans suffered heavy losses in these initial confrontations, with thousands of troops killed in skirmishes and failed assaults, but they persisted in tightening their grip on the city. By 147 BC, after repeated failures and rising frustration in Rome, Scipio Aemilianus was appointed as consul and entrusted with leading the campaign against Carthage. Scipio, the adoptive grandson of Scipio Africanus, brought fresh discipline and strategic insight to the Roman forces, which had been plagued by setbacks and heavy losses during the early years of the siege. Upon taking command, Scipio immediately reorganized the Roman army, instilling strict discipline and enhancing coordination between the infantry, cavalry, and navy. He focused on tightening the siege by constructing new siege works and fortifications to fully surround Carthage, effectively cutting off the city's supply routes by land and sea. This forced the Carthaginians into a position of growing starvation and desperation. Scipio's naval blockade proved decisive, as it severely limited Carthage's access to food and reinforcements. In addition, Scipio launched a successful assault on the Carthaginian forces stationed at Nepherus, south of Carthage. The victory at Nepherus destroyed one of Carthage's last remaining armies outside the city, severing their hopes for external reinforcements and isolating the city even further. With Carthage's supplies running out and its forces critically weakened, Scipio had tightened the noose around the city, setting the stage for the final assault. In 146 BC, Scipio Aemilianus led a final assault with 30,000 Roman troops against Carthage. Roman forces breached the city's defenses, initiating brutal urban warfare in Carthage's narrow streets. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Carthaginian defenders, initially around 50,000, including civilians, fought fiercely to protect their city. Roman soldiers advanced slowly, facing constant ambushes as the defenders fought desperately, knowing there was no escape. The final resistance occurred at the Bursa, Carthage's citadel, where Hasdrubal and his remaining forces made a last stand. After days of fighting, Hasdrubal surrendered, but many Carthaginians chose to die rather than face enslavement, with families committing suicide as Roman forces closed in. Once the city was taken, the destruction of Carthage began. Roman soldiers systematically destroyed the city, burning buildings and reducing Carthage to rubble. Of the estimated 100,000 inhabitants left in Carthage, many were either killed or enslaved, effectively wiping the city from the map. As the city burned, Scipio Aemilianus reportedly wept at the sight of Carthage's destruction. According to Polybius, he foresaw that one day Rome might suffer a similar fate, reflecting on the temporary nature of empires. This final victory marked the end of the Third Punic War, ensuring Roman supremacy in the Mediterranean and the complete annihilation of Carthage. Following the destruction of Carthage in 146 BC, the city was formally annexed by Rome. The once great Carthaginian territories in North Africa became part of the new Roman province, Africa Proconsularis. This marked the complete erasure of Carthage as a political and cultural entity. In recognition of its loyalty during the war, Utica was rewarded by Rome, becoming the new regional capital and a symbol of the shift in power. The city's favorable position on the coast made it a vital hub for Roman administration and trade in the region. Rome swiftly moved to rebuild the region under its control. The strategically located Carthaginian territory became essential for Roman colonization and further expansion into Africa. With fertile lands and a key position in the Mediterranean, Carthage's former territory played a pivotal role in Rome's future conquests and economic growth. The destruction of Carthage in 146 BC marked not only the end of the Third Punic War, but also the complete erasure of Carthaginian society. Once a dominant force in the Mediterranean, Carthage was wiped from the political map, its territory annexed by Rome, and transformed into the province of Africa Proconsularis. This ensured Rome's uncontested dominance in the Western Mediterranean, eliminating its last major rival. With Carthage gone, Rome consolidated its power, shifting its focus towards expansion. Rome's victory set the stage for further conquests in Africa, Spain, and beyond, paving the way for the creation of a vast Roman Empire. The war also cemented Roman militaristic ambition, as it now had no significant opposition in the region. Though Hannibal had been dead for years, his legacy endured. His campaigns in the Second Punic War greatly influenced Roman military tactics and strategy, shaping the way Rome approached future conflicts. The destruction of Carthage also symbolized the end of Phoenician influence in the Mediterranean. The Punic Wars, which spanned over a century, showcased Rome's resilience and determination to rise as a superpower. They also serve as a powerful reminder of the temporary nature of empires. If you enjoyed exploring the dramatic end of Carthage and Rome's rise to power, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to stay updated. Let us know in the comments what ancient battle or empire you'd like to see next.